In the animal kingdom, there are not many creatures that have as large a brain relative to their body size as humans. This is certainly true among the great apes. But why is this the case? Of all the creatures of the earth who could ascend to the highest reaches of intelligence, why are humans at the top? Biologist, philosopher, and psychedelic expert Terence McKenna puts forward a hypothesis in his book, Food of the Gods, that provides a unique perspective on the question of how the human brain got so big. Many in the field of biology have debated the causal factors of our advanced intelligence, and these debates still continue to this day. Some believe it was the transition from walking on all fours to our current bipedal posture that was the catalyst for our growing brain. Others think that our ability to control fire and subsequently learn to cook our meat is the reason. And some believe that the need for better hand-eye coordination in order to hunt successfully necessitated an increase in brain size. What is agreed upon in the scientific community, it would seem, is this fact. During our evolutionary development, the human brain size tripled within a span of 3 million years. And although 3 million years sounds like a long time for an organ to grow, some biologists believe that for an organ of such importance to grow that much, 3 million years is not that long at all. At the end of these truly remarkable 3 million years in the evolution of the human species, the human brain size had tripled. Lumsden and Wilson call this perhaps the fastest advance recorded for any complex organ in the whole history of life. Such a remarkable rate of evolutionary change in the primary organ of a species implies the presence of extraordinary selective pressures. The ambitious claim that McKenna puts forward in Food of the Gods is that it was the consumption of hallucinogenic substances, namely psilocybin, that is responsible for this drastic increase in brain size and therefore our intelligence. Now, before I dive deeper into the claim being made here, it might be worthwhile to point out that some of you may have already heard of this idea. Anyone who is familiar with pre-COVID Joe Rogan, or if you are familiar with the work of other psychedelic researchers like Roland Fisher or Michael Pollan, you might be familiar with the stoned ape theory, or more accurately, stoned ape hypothesis. Although, this term is never used by McKenna in his book. Stoned ape theory seems to have been coined later after the theory began to gain its own reputation among followers of McKenna. The story told in Food of the Gods weaves itself through all of human history, and the connection between early hominids and hallucinogens is only the beginning of this story. So what actually is the claim that McKenna is making in this book? Well, the real stoned ape hypothesis begins near the rainforests of Africa millions of years ago, where early proto-hominids lived in an environment that they were fully adapted to. The story goes that these proto-hominids came across a substance called psilocybin through the adoption and consumption of certain mushrooms in their diet. Now, there is no clear answer for what the exact species of mushroom is that these hominids allegedly encountered, but McKenna suspects it was a species called Stropharia cubensis, known today by most as the magic mushroom. We deem these mushrooms to be magical because psilocybin, the psychoactive compound found in the species, causes vivid and intense hallucinations when taken in large doses. But hallucinations are not the only side effect of these mushrooms, according to McKenna. In his book, McKenna lays out a three-stage process by which the mushrooms became habituated into the lives of the proto-hominids who would later become us modern humans. So, let's explore what these stages are. The first is the low-dose stage. This is where the proto-hominids first encountered the mushrooms and ingested very small portions of them to see if they would produce any potentially fatal side effects, as any species trying out a new source of food would do. According to McKenna, anyone who ingests small amounts of a psilocybin-containing mushroom would feel side effects, but these side effects would prove beneficial. At the first low level of usage is the effect that Fisher noted. Small amounts of psilocybin, consumed with no awareness of its psychoactivity while in the general act of browsing for food, and perhaps later consumed consciously, impart a noticeable increase in visual acuity, especially edge detection. As visual acuity is at a premium among hunter-gatherers, the discovery of the equivalent of chemical binoculars could not fail to have an impact on the hunting and gathering success of those individuals who availed themselves of this advantage. The first low-dose stage of encountering the mushroom, argues McKenna, would enable the hunters and gatherers in these tribes to be more successful hunters and gatherers, due to the increased ability of edge detection for being able to more easily spot prey. More successful hunts means more food and therefore nutrition for the rest of the tribe, which would lead to a healthier population with more instances to produce offspring. The second stage is the medium dose stage. In this stage, the psilocybin works to stimulate the central nervous system. Because psilocybin is a stimulant of the central nervous system, when taken in slightly larger doses, it tends to trigger restlessness and sexual arousal. Thus, at the second level of usage, by increasing instances of copulation, the mushrooms directly favored human reproduction. Essentially, McKenna is saying that the mushroom functions here as an aphrodisiac. The proto-hominids would become more aroused and would engage in more reproductive behavior, which would lead to an increase in population. The third stage, the high dose of the mushroom, is where the term magic mushroom begins to become apparent. At high doses, reality starts to recede and hallucinations begin. For a proto-hominid who is barely able to comprehend how to control fire, the experience of a large dose of psilocybin would be completely life-altering and truly paradigm-shifting. This third level, then, is the level of the full-blown shamanic ecstasy. The psilocybin intoxication is a rapture whose breadth and depth is the despair of prose. It is wholly other, and no less mysterious to us than it was to our mushroom-munching ancestors. The boundary-dissolving qualities of shamanic ecstasy predispose hallucinogen-using tribal groups to community bonding and to group sexual activities, which promote gene mixing, higher birth rates, and a communal sense of responsibility for the group offspring. Once again, McKenna is claiming that sexual reproduction is increased at this dosage, although this time it is due to the speculated increase in group sexual activity. It seems that at whatever dose a person takes, sexual activity becomes more prevalent and copulation becomes more successful. The real important side effect of high doses of psilocybin, however, is that it likely would lead to an emphasis on community-oriented behaviors and attitudes. The boundary-dissolving effects of a large dose of psilocybin, so I've heard, puts the user in contact with the reality that we are all a part of nature. This realization absolutely could predispose a person to accept a transition away from tribalism and towards communalism. All one has to do is look back to the 1960s to see this exact sentiment in the psychedelic-inspired hippie movement across the Western world that preached values of love, acceptance, and community. The real stoned ape hypothesis is not so much a theory that humans became human because they liked to consume what we today would classify as a drug. It is much more an idea that suggests that substances which had already been incorporated into the diet of our ancestors became catalysts for habits and behaviors that would progress them along the path to become the dominant species destined to rule the planet. It is not psilocybin per se that McKenna is suggesting increased the physical size of the human brain, but it did appear to increase our consciousness and our ability to interact more positively with our fellow tribe members. Mushroom usage and the habituation of psychedelic side effects into our ancient way of living predisposed our brains for growth. At whatever dose the mushroom was used, it possessed the magical property of conferring adaptive advantages upon its archaic users and their group. Increased visual acuity, sexual arousal, and access to the transcendent other led to success in obtaining food, sexual prowess and stamina, abundance of offspring, and access to realms of supernatural power. So, is psilocybin the real missing link that connects our pre-sapien ancestors to modern humanity? Well, like most questions of human history, the jury is still out on the exact causes of our extraordinary brain capabilities. Most likely, it was a combination of many different factors. Nevertheless, McKenna offers us an interesting and unique claim to consider, and one that could alter the way we think about our own humanity. If you like the subject of today's video and would like to hear me talk about similar subjects, then a good incentive for me to make more videos would be for you to like, comment, and subscribe. And now I'd like to end with another passage from the book where McKenna talks about what it really means to be a human. All the unique characteristics and preoccupations of human beings can be summed up under the heading of cognitive activities. dance, philosophy, painting, poetry, sport, meditation, erotic fantasy, politics, and ecstatic self-intoxication. We are truly Homo sapiens, the thinking animal. Our acts are all a product of the dimension that is uniquely ours, the dimension of cognitive activity, of thought and emotion, memory and anticipation, of psyche.